Now we're recording to the cloud. All right, everyone. Bienvenidos and bonjour. Ni hao. Walani. Welcome. Today is core office hours, and it's going to be hosted by, as always, myself, Keone Chong. What's up, y'all? Jose Caballer and Mary Gribbin are usually on the call with us. They are not able to be here. Jose is actually working on podcasts. So, as you know, we've been diving into a lot of content and really starting to build out, a lot of the messaging and discuss the principles behind core and these frameworks that we built. So he's working on that. Mary Gribbin hopefully will be joining us shortly. We are, as you know, we're all experienced practitioners. Like this isn't, we're not just sitting here making content every day. Like we're in the field, and it's real in the field. And so, she is working with another company and helping to integrate Agile and develop the human skills around flow to help them really manage projects. So, but yeah, office hours, y'all. So what I want to do is, I'm always going to invite for you guys to like and subscribe. It's super, super important that you kind of be able to connect with us, and that way we can learn more about your journey, more about how you guys are trying to scale up, your creative thinking and creative building skills, and how you guys can really scale up your value. As always, you can find Core at coresmagic.com. As Chris says, it's not magic, but it is magical. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today before we dive into the questions. So, as always, we believe in being able to step into a collaboration in your truest sense, your truest self, with your full honesty. And, it's why we have these childlike photos of us, because, I ultimately believe, and there's a few others that believe out there, that our purpose and our journey is really identified in our childhood. I think back to this incredible, and I think I mentioned it in design therapy last week. There was this incredible story between Simon Sinek and Tony Hsieh, the writer of Delivering Happiness, and how one of his earliest childhood memories was capturing fireflies in a jar and then using the jar as a flashlight. And he talks about a conversation that he had with Simon Sinek, and what he came to understand and realize was that each of these fireflies were really analogies, metaphors for people, and to help people find their true light, and then bringing people together to light the way, for other people in the world. And I think it's a really powerful story, because when you look at the what it is that he actually does, he's a man that sells shoes. But for him to still live that journey, to live that purpose, and to represent it in his principles and his how, was incredible. And we all have that within us. So let's dive in, and just to remind you guys, as always, we are preparing for launch. So the Systm Accelerator is almost ready. Oh, I'm so geeked, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with you guys. So we'll be sharing that with you guys very, very soon. And just to be very, very clear, our objective is to build a platform for purpose-driven professionals designing the future. We believe that we are entering an age of renaissance, and the 21st century is going to be this incredible opportunity for us all. And we're really excited to help you guys on that journey to kind of redesign the world, from, the pain and trauma and, the inequities that we see now, to a vibrant, collective, inclusive, and diverse future. So this is brought to you by the Systm. What is the Systm? The Systm is a social learning experiment. It's tools, community, and guidance to empower the next generation of creative leaders and builders to redesign the world. this is a partnership between Mary, Jose, and myself. We have another partner, Monique, who's incredibly powerful. And, this is really something that we came together to, really to leverage our collective experiences and to creating a future that isn't about dollar signs or shiny objects. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda today. So we're going to spend about 15 minutes doing a drop-in. We're going to do the core Q&A. We'll talk about the download and then the upload for today. So what we're going to do, it's going to be a little bit different, is the download is going to be based sort of on our questions for today. So, the concerns and stuff that you have, we're going to, leverage that into a theme. And then ultimately, we're going to talk about what we hope that you take from today's session. So let's drop in. And the first thing that I'd like to do is I'd love to hear from you guys. Name, location, and the first time that you facilitated core. So I'll share and I'll model that for you. I'm Keone Chong, and I'm located in Los Angeles. And the first time that I facilitated core was for a catering company. So there's a young lady that I knew at the time that I was buying like smoothies and food from, and she was a small startup. And I was like, yo, yesterday I just picked up this thing called Core. You want to come in today? I'd love to, facilitate it for you. I'd love to give you, some advice on how to leverage your brand and help build your brand. And I just dived in, and I was clunky at first. I was awkward. I was all over the place. I didn't really understand, how to tie in all of the different elements together, but I forced myself to push through it. And at the end of it, she was like, this was amazing. I was like, wait, what? I thought this was horrible. But she loved it. And she took some of the insights from it and like created a couple products around it. And she did really well with that. So I'd love to hear from some of you guys about the first time that you guys facilitated core. And so we've got Christina. So Christina, she's based in Ontario, Canada, and she said the first time she facilitated core was on herself. Awesome and brave. Super awesome. Arsenije from Belgrade, Serbia. And for the client, it was this year on January 2nd. And then for your community, it was in December. Awesome. Patricia says she finds it hard to apply core on herself, to be honest. And look, I totally get it. One of the things about facilitating core on yourself, and this is from my experience, Jose believes this as well. I think it's usually great to have somebody that knows you facilitate it for you. For me, that's the best way. There's a saying that knowledge of self can't come from self. You need something of a reflection, right? A mirror to be able to see your own face. We have therapists to be able to hear our own emotions as a soundboard and to be able to talk through like situations. Yeah. Hey, Ars, here's a question. Would you like to drop in? Hop on the mic real quick?
Me? Yeah.
Yeah. So let's hear about the first time you facilitated core.
Yeah, actually, first time was on my community that I'm running. So we were basically preparing because we were. It was basically based first on the promoting young artists in Belgrade, Serbia, but then we realized that as community progressed and things started to move in a good direction, that it's starting to be a little bit boring just to do promotion, and then that there are bigger problems to solve and fun, better things to do. So then we decided to move, and then I was basically trying to figure out how to do it, and we went on the like small team building where we were doing core, but I mean, we did it, but I felt that because it was my first time, and especially because it was my organization, I couldn't be. I felt that it lacked depth. I mean, when I look at it from now, it's good, but it lacked like complete depth. It's like, you know, you have that photo like iceberg. It's like top of the iceberg without the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, and with core, the way that it's designed, and I'll I'll dive into it a little bit, um, right before we go into Q&A. But core is designed to operate in an agile framework, right? Typical brand strategy frameworks, they say, okay, we're going to go super, super deep. And then you have like 50 pages of strategy. And then you're like, well, what do I do with this? How do I integrate all of this strategy? It's super, super hard to do. And so it's a big part of the reason like that we've been testing it in large organizations, mid-sized organizations, and smaller organizations. Large organizations, they're huge. They're like the Titanic. You can't just force it to do, a U-turn. You have to make small incremental changes. And then with a community, when you're growing a brand, it's really important to be able to have data and the validation and the feedback from your community constantly, as well as the development of your products. So going too deep and going too far can is a, can be a way of you actually going off course without the appropriate validation. So it allows for you to be able to execute branding in these cycles that actually make sense, right? You did this, you did one or two or three of these items that was on your business priorities, and now you're like, okay, I'm in a great place. What does the data say? Okay, the data validates this. Okay, great. Let's continue to move on in this direction, right? And and then the next principle, that's super important about core is that it's supposed to be a living document, right? There's always there's a very common Jamaican quote is like, you make a plan and God laughs, right? Like, great, long stretched out tranched plans, are always going to need to adjust. And especially now, given the kind of markets that we're in, given the abrupt nature of the way that are the situations that our brands are in and the markets that they work in, there's all kinds of innovation, whether it's technical and technological, whether it's societal, or otherwise. You have to be able to adapt, and core really gives you a framework for that adaptation.
Yeah, I'd add to that, Keone. Can I for a sec?
What's up, Mary?
Hey, hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto too. Like, you have to be willing to give up your plan.
Mhm.
It's people over planning and process. And I'll put in the chat this thing, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in. It's like VUCA is the acronym. That's our reality. So we have to, lean on frameworks like core that allow us to, quickly regain alignment when things are off or whatever, to just get the not just, just to be flexible and agile.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mary, I'll ask for you to jump in a little bit when we talk about why we decided to really go all in, and call core a brand strategy framework. But it's more than that. It's tools, it's process, it's how to integrate um, multiple stakeholders, and it's all of these things. But let's get to that. So let's just kind of recap really quickly where we are so far, and to kind of remind you guys, that core, is definitely our flagship product. But we have a couple more coming out. We've got Fire that'll be coming out in about a month, and then Flow just afterward. That's going to be championed by Mary. And while core is all about alignment and being able to like build like the brand and like sort of like this vehicle that we're in, Fire is always, it's the why. And the why is such an important consideration, and it's sort of why we've given it its own kit, because it does require a lot of reflection, and it does require a lot of honesty. And then ultimately, we're going to have flow, which is about building, about objectives, results, and tasks. um, we are having, we're building all of this into the Systm Accelerator. So we call it the future of work, about community collaboration and guidance. And this is going to be for folks that are going to be utilizing our kits, particularly core. And so right now we're building it specifically for core practitioners. So being able to have examples of real world documents that we use, from style guides, from real projects, from real startups, to creative briefs for, you know, companies that we've worked with and helped rebrand, like EO. You know, uh, we're going to have circles so that we guys can work collaboratively on these things and get guidance from us. Of course, we have to integrate play. So there's going to be all of the things. We believe in living and working in a holistic fashion. So being able to integrate all of our primary activities, that really keep us energized and creative. And yeah, and so the reminder for the pricing, we will have a newsletter that will be launching shortly, and that will be $30 monthly and $300 yearly. The membership for the System Accelerator is going to be monthly at $125. And then the Fire Kit, which we're looking to launch in May, and that's going to be tentatively $350 with a guided course at $505. So let's dive into core Q&A. And I want to kick off core Q&A with some developments that you'll start to see around the core kit this month in particular. So the biggest thing is that we are really establishing core as a brand strategy framework. And why is that important? It's because, we've been out there, we've been testing it in the real world. We've been testing it on startups initially, but we worked with mid-sized companies and some really large companies, and we have found tremendous success. We realized that it was difficult to really like articulate what core was because of the different kinds of value that it brings, right? It is a brand strategy framework, but it's also about how you facilitate work together in collaboration. And it's also about how you identify the things that you need to build on a cyclical basis. So core, yes, we had a question in our group: is it a brand strategy framework? It absolutely is a brand strategy framework. It really helps identify the key components, the brand strategy fundamentals necessary for you to build meaningful brands. And that is really understanding your culture and the attributes and your principles. It's about understanding your customer and their needs and their story and what's happening in their lives. And then finally, it's about understanding the business priorities and the things that you need to build to get brand where it needs to go. So when you think about core, you really are discussing the fundamentals of brand strategy. Now, there are additional frameworks out there that take all of these elements and they go additionally further. They go really deep. There's nothing wrong with those frameworks. All of these frameworks work really well. We personally believe that going too deep uh, in these frameworks can sort of hamper your ability to work inclusively and collaboratively and to build cyclically. We like to operate in an agile framework, which is why a lot of folks wonder, like, and to your point, Arsenije, that you're like, hey, like, it's not going too deep. Well, of course, the challenge is how deep can you go and how much can you really build? And for most brands, for most companies, that's not very far, even within, super large budgets. Mary can speak on the experience with helping rebrand EO. They had a really significant budget, but it took time to really be able to execute the needs for the brand as a whole. The second component of core is how we facilitate core. So there aren't very many brand strategy frameworks that actually go into how you sit down and how you build a brand with a client in a collaborative way. much less with multiple stakeholders. Now, this was a challenge that Jose had very early on in his career, and Mary had very early on in their career. This is something that I had to deal with. And I struggled with trying to build a brand strategy framework because the concept of facilitation and how you actually build the brand in a collaborative way was a challenge that I never really thought to take on. Core interjects that holistically into the entire process so that every significant stakeholder has valued input. That input is taken into consideration and they can see the value of that input as it progresses down the line from idea and concept to actual design and execution. And then lastly, and not leastly, are these principles that are baked into the process of core that we think really aligns it for brands in the 21st century. You know, the fact that we approach it with agile, and Mary went in with, you know, and talked a little bit about the Agile Manifesto and how it contributes to the manner in which the exercises are designed, the way that we identify and prioritize business objectives, and then the way that we use like design thinking and, you know, user-centric thinking about where the customer is, what their concerns are, and what is truly important to them. And, you know, this helps deal with a lot of the challenges that we deal with as designers and creative thinkers and builders, where you have clients that have shiny object syndrome, or you have clients with a lot of subjectivity, right? Now, these are things that in the past you would typically address in it almost like in a personal conversation, as opposed to a conversation that really revolves around the work that you're doing and the impact of the work and how it needs to be executed. So we're really going to start diving into a lot of these principles and why they're important. And we're going to start having conversations around them. We're really going to talk to you guys about the power of facilitation and why facilitation is such an important component of core, and why a lot of people, you know, initially, you know, a lot of folks just looked at it as discovery, like because it has this deep integration of how to facilitate brand strategy, how to facilitate that understanding of determining and articulating what brand strategy fundamentals are. But core is all of that. You know, it's the big bundle. It's this enormous amount of value, and I think now that we've had enough experience in the field and we've tested it with enough real companies and we've built enough like powerful brands, now I think we can really talk about it in its true form, its final form, as Frieza would say. So, so now I'm going to open up the floor to core Q and A's. I'd love to hear, you know, from you guys, and you guys can post it in the chat. Raise your hand to speak. But you know, I'm here to address and answer any concerns, and Mary as well. Any concerns that you guys have with core. You know, whether you're struggling with facilitation or translating the design, or, you know, having to appropriately identify and prioritize what it is that you need. We're here to provide all of that support for you guys. So the floor is open. And for Dexter and David, you know, welcome. You know, really glad to have you here. Would love to hear about any experiences that you have with core, and any challenges that you might have. Arsenije, what's up, bro? Let's talk.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, one of the hardest things for me regarding core at the beginning was basically figuring out when it comes to the target audience, especially for the brands that are new, how do you go about it without going too far? I mean, I realized that it's about feedback basically, and that's what I realized now, especially because you give something some form and then you see how it stands, and then you change it back. But when it comes to the target audience, that was for me one of the hardest thing, especially because I was dealing with brands that are new, so they didn't know who their target. And then I have basically they're confused in going like be open-minded about trying to define who will be ideal target for them.
That's a great question, and that is a question that we get a lot with startups. So, in my mind, and I'll have Mary talk about her experiences and her perspective, because I'd love to hear her thoughts on this. In my experience, generally speaking, the founders or the primary, whoever has the primary vision, the infinite vision, as I like to call it, where they see this thing, they know of this opportunity, it's this thing that they're trying to capture. What I like to do is I like to understand like why they have that vision. And understanding that why behind their vision allows for me to understand how they align personally with that vision. And most often than not, it's generally a reflection of themselves, right? A lot of startup guys, they're building a problem or they're building a solution for a problem that they generally have. And so I will start with them, and I like to use them as like the basis for the profile. But then I abstract it, right? So I'm like, okay, if I understand what your needs are, and if I understand what your wants are and your concern and what's happening in your life for you to build this solution, all right, now that we have that quadrant of story, we have the quadrant of the wants and the quadrant of the needs. Now let's go back to the demographics. This person, where does this person generally go, right? And so it could totally be aligned with them because they generally are a great representative of it. So, their particular demographics may be really great and you can start there. Or maybe it's an insight into a greater audience, a greater culture, right? A greater community that you're like, oh, okay, well, what are the communities that you hang out in? Ah, are your friends having these same kind of problems? Ah, interesting. Or do people that do these kind of activities that you like to do, are they the ones that are having similar problems? Tell me about them, right? So there's always a place to start where you can like anchor into the conversation, and then you can start to dig a little bit deeper. And the insights, they're there, right? But it's all about the depth of the conversation and the curiosity that you have behind the motivations, and why these people are in these situations or these circumstances that would force them to need a solution like this particular brand is offering. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I just have like problem. I understood that part, and it's like basically you start from founder and then expand on that and try to find where is that target. But I had a funny problem because basically the founders are really young, because that was like my first core and I was like practicing it. So that these were my friends, and I mean they're a lot young, and basically they're now starting the brand, and it is hard because usually their friends you don't have enough money to buy what they're creating. So that's why they had a problem that I was not sure how. I mean, basically we define it that their target audience is someone from IT industry, and they're basically creatives, and it was hard to define it in that way. We first tried, but we were all aware that because they are creating like really interesting and colorful chairs, the people that they are surrounded with even don't have enough money, or maybe they will buy it but just to support it. So that's when, and they also had that, like they were like sad because they were like none of my friends are not my target audience, and I was confused how to perceive that.
Well, so here's what I like to do, right? I like to, at the end of a strategy session, after presenting strategy for a startup in particular, if they are, they're still not necessarily sure about the value of their customer profiles, well, then it's time to do a little bit of market research, right? Okay, You have an
Yeah.
idea of what the product is. But Mary, I think let's have you join the
I
conversation.
was just gonna say, you can validate like anywhere along the roadmap, right? With actual like whether you do it like guerrilla research where you're just like going out like on the street literally and just grabbing people and being like, does this solve a problem? Or you do it like by paying for data, right? Like through like SurveyMonkey or any of those great UX research tools. um, yeah, you want to validate with data and real people. Um, and I mean, using those frameworks that are in core and that are really design thinking centric. Like core doesn't have a lean business model canvas as part of its component as a module, but it's a great additional thing you could do, right? It's like identify what the value proposition is for the customer, based on the problem you're solving for them, you know, and what you need in terms of partners and yeah, to execute. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's so many great frameworks that complement core, that are design thinking frameworks that can help you hone in and then validate with data as often as possible. So just think about it in an agile way. Like every couple weeks, you're gonna test something. You know, um, does that help?
And
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's complicated. So yeah, it's basically if you don't sure, as Pape said, I mean, it's being curious in a sense first when it comes to the discovering part and seeing what's the founder vision and what's their the purpose and values, and then basically going outside and testing as soon as possible, basically using that maybe as first hypothesis to test, like is this before maybe even testing something else, using that as a hypothesis to test, is this like our target audience.
yeah, Arsene, Jose has a great analogy when he talks about core, where he's like, it's like a mixing board, it's like a DJ board, like you're constantly like toggling and you're pushing the threshold. Maybe the customer profile needs adjustment. Maybe they need to be a little bit older. Maybe they need to be a little bit more senior in their career, or maybe more experienced, right? Like maybe they're in an adjacent career field. So maybe they're maybe not in IT per se, but maybe they're software developers, right? Like there's all of the insights are there, but as we call it, you kind of have to mine for the goal, right? Like you have to kind of dig in and try to find out where the relationships can be shifted and how you can use them to explore. And it's great brand strategy is just like an ethnography. So I don't know if you ever heard of that term before. I went to school, and before I left, I had shifted my career into anthropology. Ethnography is a cultural study. And in cultural studies, you're always trying to understand the culture of this thing that you're trying to find, right? Ethnographies are basically what you're doing when you're doing design thinking and user thinking. You're trying to understand this person and the culture and all of the things that are happening in that space, and all of the associated things that relate to it. What are they buying? What are their purchase habits? What are their social habits? What social platforms are they on? Are they on Twitter? Well, let's hop on Twitter and let's reach out to a few software developers. Hey, what's up? I'm building this really interesting product and I think that you might like it. Would you mind if I asked you a couple questions? Right? We've experienced it here where I facilitated the group, the focus group for the team. Right? I knew that there was a product that we needed to build. I knew that that was going to be a way that we can anchor and to start scaling our value to the community. I had an idea of how it should operate. Mary had great feedback. Jose had great feedback. And we were at a point where like, well, how should we decide? Well, the answer is easy. Let's validate with data. let's get you guys together. Let's ask a couple questions, and then let's build based off of that feedback. This is exactly how we ended up to where we're at now.
Can I jump in with something?
Please, Pape, join us.
Yeah, no, I was just that core is also, I use it to manage expectations, but not only for the client, but toward myself, because I think sometimes we put these expectations on ourselves that we need to have every single answer for the client. And sometimes it feels like you're failing if you don't have the answer or something like that. But I mean, if they want that kind of answer, I'm sure they're not paying me yet for that experience. So it's like, I'm sure there's someone else that can charge much more for strategy. But right now I'm just focusing on alignment and understanding the project and giving my point of view and getting to bring people together. But as Keone said, is if they don't know their customer, well, maybe there's some research that has to be done, but that's not part of core. It's just a complement of core. And it's something that I think every business should have. Like if you're selling a product, you should know your why, your what, and who you're doing it for. And you as a designer, you're just there listening and gathering the information to put it together for another project that is moving forward. But normally business do this before, and they start testing and they start realizing. So I think it's understanding that when you get to core, they are in some point of their project where they will know something, and that something is it's important to get it out and just listening and asking questions and embracing silence, like even if it's uncomfortable, telling them like, you should know better your client, like there's a solution for that. And I have no idea about doing market research, but it's something that I've been like trying to understand more and following my intuition. And just like last week creating that brief, it just taught me to look into places that I didn't know and look into the competition. What were the names they were using? What were the colors and all of this? And I came up with a research telling them how to differentiate by not using those colors, by differentiation on the naming and all of that. And it's just, the answers are there. And when clients don't know it, I think if you can guide them, do it. But it's not your like, or I don't put myself that expectation anymore of having all the answers. It's just that, like.
Yes, and Pape, I love that, and I'll try to recap that for those of us that just joined, and then we'll move into inviting Dexter to the stage and having a conversation with him on how he uses core. So core is really great in that it's a holistic approach to brand development, and so it very clearly identifies when there is some component of your brand that needs additional development. And you don't always have to have the answers. In fact, I prefer to go into facilitation sessions without any real knowledge of what it is that I'm facilitating, right? I like to go in and to be open to the possibility of whatever it is that could be there, because the process is really about embracing the unknown and really identifying something unique and powerful in that, and really opening the floor up for new understandings and new perspectives, right? My old business partner, who is a core practitioner and is doing some really incredible work in Mexico right now, he uses this analogy. He said, Keone, this is how I feel when you take core. It's like I sit here and like I give you a rock, and like you take that rock and you just throw it into space, and now it's a planet, and you're like, that's your brand now. That's exactly what it is. You are providing definition and opportunity of understanding this thing in a whole new way that really pushes forth the vision and the opportunity for your audience, for your community, for the product and the product development and the priorities around the brand and how you can build and move towards that space, right? And core really allows for you to articulate this thing that generally is really hard to identify and see outside of like linear boundaries. and to think about it in this massive, huge thing that can really grow and take, a powerful impact towards its community. And you don't need any real expertise behind it other than your curiosity. I'm not a classically trained designer. I went to school for mechanical engineering and aerospace, and I didn't like any of those things. And so I did a little bit of law. I didn't like that. And so I moved into anthropology. I loved that. But then I started a career in journalism. So for me, like, I sit here next to brand strategists who are like, hey, well, I went to Art Center. And I'm like, well, cool. I didn't know about Art Center until I was like 25 years old, but it's a cool place to go. I'd have loved to gone there, but it doesn't make my brand strategy any less, right? And so for those of you that are in this group that are non-designers, right? You don't need to have a design background. You don't need to have any kind of specialized background to be a brand strategist, but you do need curiosity, and you need to have a deep generalist understanding of the world, right? Like, I'm a voracious reader, and I'm constantly looking at new markets, new psychologies, new financial frameworks, new technology, new media, new creative culture. Like, all of those things really power my ability to be an effective strategist. So Pape, thank you so much for that. And then let's invite Dexter to the stage. Dexter, how are you, man?
I am great. How's everybody doing?
Good, man. Good. Glad to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here. But yeah, so I guess my history with core is I started a few years ago because I'm primarily, a designer, but I wanted to transition from just like being a designer to being more, of an expert, and a consultant, to, basically leverage myself from that position rather than, just taking design orders. As I've been doing core over the years, I've worked with, primarily, brands, with either individuals or, smaller brands, local. And one thing I noticed, with working with these brands, a lot of times, they already have like a small following, that they've built, just organically. And I got to the point where I realized that, everything was kind of like just a derivative of culture. So I started framing how I do core completely around culture. So I started looking at brands as if, think of like a brand as its own country, and like the logo is the flag of that country. But when you think of like a country, you think of like, how are the people? What are these common ideologies, the way we speak, these different things that we have in common that unite us no matter where we are, no matter, where we are in this country. Or you think about, like in America, you think how, America as a whole has this brand that when people think of America, there's this image that comes to your mind. But then even breaking down like on a subculture level, like how people speak in Florida is very distinct. Like they have a very distinct culture. How people speak in Texas is very distinct, having their own distinct cultures, cities with their own sports team. Like back in the Gap when they had, the Bad Boy Pistons, and how that city bought into that,
That bad boy image.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
thinking of how the city, bought into that persona. And when you go to a game, like there's all these different type of people with all these different type of backgrounds, but it's this mentality that all connects them. So taking that concept and kind of transferring it to like the idea of building a brand. So it's like, how do we create our own country? And within this country, what do the citizens of our country, what do we believe in? What are the ideas that we share and the ideologies that we share that unite us as a country? And then from a design perspective, like, cities have their own, type of architecture. When you think of like, and go to Japan, like how do their street signs look? When you think of Japan, like it's a very distinct art style comes to your mind. And so thinking from the perspective of how do I create those things for my own brand and then create this ecosystem to where, our customers or, you know, the members of our community can coexist within that. And these are the things that we share. And, you know, when we wave our flag with that logo on it, that become, you know, our representative. So like I started to frame it around that perspective because it just felt to me that everything is basically just culture. And once you create that culture, then everyone shares that culture. And then you build that brand around that shared culture, similar to like, you know, just kind of basically how countries operate, you know. So yeah, that's kind of how I, you know, evolved with how I use Core.
So that's incredible, Dexter. You know, you getting rounds of applause, you know, from the community, and you know, you really struck a nerve. So if you were to ever look on my LinkedIn or like any place where I needed to put a title, I would always describe myself as a brand futurist and a culture architect,
Mhm.
specifically for that point. In school, you know, taking a lot of anthro classes, one of the things that I learned was cultures define themselves around a few things. They define themselves around values, beliefs, and world perspectives. And in that, or in those things, they develop behaviors and habits and ways to identify each other, right?
Mhm.
A Laker fan knows a Laker fan
Yeah,
and knows a Clipper fan, right?
yeah, exactly.
You don't come into, if you're Philippine, and Filipinos are like, they're huge Laker fans, right? Like, don't bring that Clipper stuff around here. Don't bring that into the house. Don't wear that hat up in the house. You know, like we know, like there's a very distinct cultural way of identifying it. And so in culture, we identify our way between like four basic things. First, it's language.
Mhm.
Second, it's clothing and dress. Third, it's food.
Mhm.
And then fourth, it's like mannerisms, colloquialisms, right? Like when you, like if you meet a brother out here from LA and you give him like a handshake, there's a very particular type of handshake that you're gonna get if you're from LA, right? I've spent time in Detroit and I gave handshakes and they're like,
It's not it.
where you from, bro? Like it's all good, but you not from around these parts,
Exactly.
right? And so, you know, we start to identify that, and that is such a huge component of design thinking, right? Of user focused thinking. So I'll share this with you. There are two concepts in anthropology to understand cultures. One is called Edic, and that's ETIC, and there's called emic, that's EMIC, right? Now, typically, Edic perspectives are from an outsider's perspective. So it's an outsider looking in, right? Most anthropologists have this perspective. They sit there and they see a culture, they see how they behave, they do all of this investigation and understanding, but it's they call that armchair anthropology. It's where you sit back and you're like, oh, this, right? Great examples are like sportscasters that never played the sport, and they'd be like, oh, well, if I was in the game, I'd have done this and then that. And you're like, but bro, you don't even play. Like you never you didn't even play in high school. You didn't make it out of middle school playing, right? And now you're here and you're talking about what it should be, right? That is an Edic perspective. Now there's emic perspective. This is a perspective from someone who's actually been within the culture. And you know, Arsenic, like this is a great way for you to kind of understand the challenges that you have when you are of the culture, when you are within the culture. Then you can have a greater understanding of the motivations and the psychology behind it. Margaret Mead, a famous anthropologist, had a book called Coming of Age in Samoa. Now, she integrated herself into society. She allowed for herself to act as one within the community. And within that perspective, understanding the trials and tribulations, the difficulties, the concerns, having to live and operate as one of the tribe, quite literally, she brought a very unique perspective. Now, here's a challenge: we are always going to have bias. There's a thing called relativism, which means that we are always going to be biased in the way that we were enculturated and raised in this world. So this is why it is so important for us to have a diverse perspective of ideas, of brand strategists, of all of these things. We have an we have unlimited culture that exists and all of these subcultures that exist, right? And we all are able to bring a unique perspective because of the way that we were maybe raised or grew up in the culture. And so we can take that and add to the insights, right? Like, and I'll share for myself, for example, I was raised, I call myself like an American, but I'm not America because I had a very strict and restrictive upbringing. I wasn't allowed to really watch TV or just have carte blanche access to all of the culture and the music and all the things that are happening in America. My mother was very, very focused on me being super educated and being, well trained in the math and the arts and the sciences and the physics and language and all of these things, which is great to develop my intellectual capacity. But my relationship with culture is very different. I had very little understanding of music and artists in the 80s, which is why when I started to understand music and culture in my mid 20s, I was like, oh my God, the 80s is an incredible year. The 80s, it was like the greatest generation ever. Like, what? Tears for Fears? Who is this? What is this music? This is incredible. This is making my tummy have butterflies when I'm in the club and I'm dancing, right? Like that, it was new to me. I was able to experience it as like a fan of the first place. But that perspective of being an outsider constantly made me look at things in a very different way. It was less about bias and it was more about the curiosity of like, well, why are they so valuable, right? Like when I understood that Jordans were a thing, I was like, why are Jordans a thing? Like I didn't really understand until I started playing ball. And I was like, oh, Jordan, he's he's up there. Kobe's go. But Jordan's up there. Jordan never shot like Kobe. But again, right? That understanding and that curiosity was so important for me to have this deep understanding, right? And so if I were going to like really encapsulate your perspective, I would say that you are absolutely right, right? We all in a way are building these little microcosms of culture. And all of these brands, particularly the smaller brands, have really great culture. And this is why it's because they're building their brands in more traditional ways. They don't have major outreach or super social media. They're meeting them on a face-to-face basis. These are people that they know, right? A lot of them be like, oh, you want to meet one of my customers? Well, there's Jenny down the street and Bob that comes around, 4 times, and you're laughing because right? It's closer to old school relationship marketing, right? And this is, I personally think that's the future of brands. I think that we're getting to a point where we can't scale these relationships, meaningful relationships like this anymore. I really believe that microeconomies are going to be reflective of the future of brands, but that's a whole other conversation. But
Sure.
the key that you bring is that curiosity and that perspective that this is a whole inclusive thing. It's a culture. It's not just the product, but it's what happens after the product. And it's what happens in between the need for the product. And it's all of that interstitial, yo, what's up? You good? You good? Great. I just want to make sure you're good. All right, cool. When you gonna come back around? You gonna come back around in a couple of weeks? All right, well, I'll see you then. Well, hey man, if I don't see that, tell your mama I said what's up, tell your cousin I say, hey, get well, and tell your grandmama you're still looking good. Right?
For sure.
And so that's the relationship of I think looking at these smaller brands and the cultures that they exist within and like the mechanisms that really allow for them to thrive. But dude, powerful insight, man. And thank you for sharing.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, man. Um, so it's noon. I know that we said that this was going to be an hour, and Mary had to go. But if anybody wants to hang around, and does anybody else have any questions, or any like concerns? Like, because I said a lot in that like last section, and I don't know if anyone has concerns, questions, wants me to elaborate a little bit more. But I'll definitely make the space open for you guys.
Well, just for one, Dexter, thank you for that analogy. I'm totally ripping it off from you. It's so good. Because I think a lot of people don't really know what the definition of a true brand is. They have misconceptions based on just like a logo and design. So I love how he put that analogy with like the logo is the flag and like the language and that whole thing. I was just typing notes. So that was great. I think I will use that, especially in conversation with people who are like technicians or they're maybe engineers, or they're the type of people who aren't creative at all and they're just focused on like their job. So I'm definitely going to use that. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Alrighty, guys. So do we have any other questions?
Um, for me, an insight that I'm like thinking is that um, design is so broad, and sometimes that's why in core, when you get to the business goals, that's where you define the scope of what you're trying to achieve, and it's so important to do it to one being in alignment, because usually clients, let's say they come with a logo, and of course at the end when you define awareness, you will say, yeah, so there's a logo, but then they need social media, they want to build a YouTube channel, they want all this stuff, blah blah blah. And there you can start seeing like the scope opens up, and it's like an opportunity to from the beginning start moving forward. But I also have, I'm really careful there, because they start to imagine that when you're doing strategy, you're talking about it, you're going to do that. So also be clear about that. And the last thing is that the best practice that I found to like, one thing is core and the discovery and the strategy, but then the execution, it's something that I've realized it only comes with experience. So either you bring someone to the table that knows how to do it, and you can align them, and like, let's say packaging, I don't do any packaging, and I bring a specialist on that. But for example, in social media or marketing, what I'm doing is that I have my own t-shirt brand, and I'm just validating ideas every single week, as Mary said. Like, I'm just understanding core from the perspective of the client. So I'm just, I think it's really useful, and not just as me as a client, as designer, but in a business. Like, I'm selling t-shirts, I have a goal, and I have to sell t-shirts, but I want to build a brand and a culture around it. And as we were saying, I made a profile of the customers, and I've met some that are really, really similar to what I created. But there's also this new bunch of people that I never thought would be a part of this, and I started just like asking questions, and it's been really beneficial when I get into core sessions with clients, because I know the needs on the other side, and I know how important it is to move project forwards and not only stay on strategy. And if you can go to the core journal of Jose Caballer, he did one where he talks about this, and it's like amazing, like how to balance, like strategy on its own is like it won't work, like execution, it's amazing. So thank you.
Yeah. So, Pape, I'm going to oh, Cassie. So I'm gonna make a point, and then Cassie, I'm gonna let you come back in, and then we're going to end the call. But thank you guys so much for joining the broadcast. So, Pape, you touched on a couple things, and I think they're super important um, to understand. All right. Yes, execution is always going to be a challenge, and that is a skill set that you have to develop. Um, what you'll start to understand, and it's some of the principles that we have baked into core, and it's that of collaboration, right? There are going to be people that have like the idea, and they're going to see the vision, and then they're going to be people that are actually going to be able to build and execute on that vision, right? And because and you'll start to see it. There's going to be some people that are in um, that are in your session that are going to struggle with creative vision, and that's okay. Well, all that means is that they're probably going to be better at executing the vision, right? What's important is that they feel like they're included, that they know that we care about them being a part of this process, and that we all have shared values towards this common goal, this infinite vision of the brand, right? As I like to call it. Now, what is really powerful is that it also means that you, as a facilitator, don't have to have the skills in house to execute, right? What it means is you have to just have the ability to articulate the vision in a very clear and concise way, and to be able to translate that vision into what the designer needs to execute, right? These are all human skills. This is about communication. This is about facilitation. This is about, empathy. This is about, the ability to sit with somebody and connect with them and to walk them through a process and to help articulate that and help understand that and help guide them. This is why core allows for anybody to level up. But just like in any sport, you got to put the reps in, right? You're not going to step out on the court and just start shooting like Steph Curry. That's not going to happen. You got to put the hours, you got to put the reps in the gym. You've got to really understand who you are, and you have to really develop that curiosity and that ability to think laterally, right? Core is really great for those that think laterally like this. And there's an article on deep generalization, which is going to really explain why that's a superpower. And I will post that in the core brand strategy fundamentals group. So we're changing the name and we're really starting to articulate the value and why it's important. There's a lot of conversations that I've been having in other groups, and I'm just like, you guys are completely missing the point out of brand strategy. Like folks that are talking about sprinkling emotions after you develop the product and after you develop the why and all of that. I'm like, no, that's disingenuous. That's fake. You can't continue to function like that. That brands in the 21st century are going to be authentic from the inside out. Their values and their passion is going to reflect that. You don't have to sit here and be like, well, I created this thing and it makes me feel this way. No, you created this thing because you felt that way. But that is a whole nother conversation. So Cassie, you're up last, and then we'll move on to our outro.
Thanks. So I had a call with a potential lead last week, which, not too far in, I knew they probably wouldn't be the right client for me, but I used it to really practice my conversation and like the mirroring technique when we're talking about money.
Mm-hmm.
And he had made a comment that I think you kind of touched on that was like, oh, so I have to actually so I'm just paying that much just for strategy and you're not even going to implement anything in there. And it's like, well, no, that's extra. And he's like, was appalled that he would have to invest in that. So I like your comment about putting in the reps. But the common question I get, and I also got from this potential client, was, so what now after core? Do your services end there? And I think it was the concern from the client is that I'm just gonna come in their mind, I'm gonna come in, tell them what to do, and then not do it and leave and let them just flounder on their own. I think that the biggest concern, so that's why I get that question of so what's the process after core? Now what? So that's my first question.
Okay.
If we want to talk about it, or
let's do that, right? I want to deliver as much value to you as possible. So to address your first point, yeah, there are going to be some potential clients that are going to balk. They're going to be like, wait a minute, you're going to solve my problem, but you're not going to build the solution, right? Well, first you need to understand what is happening with your brand, right? For me, core has always been about orientation. It's about understanding where you're at, what your challenges are, what your true challenges are, being able to diagnose the real root cause, and being understanding how to move forward, right? That's knowing the path. Then you've got to actually walk the path, and that means building out the things that you need to build, right? And so it depends really, that question will really depend on the kind of client that you're in, and what stage they are, in their maturity cycle. So for startups, for example, strategy is going to be less important because they don't tend to have an established business. They're just building stuff, they're just getting off the ground, right? So they're like, oh yeah, well, we kind of already kind of think we know what we want to know, and they're really looking for the execution, right?
yeah, I think so. To build on that point, he had made the comment of 2,500, which I think is really not that much for strategy, especially for what's especially what he wants to build. But he said the whole, well, I could just like wrap my truck for 2,500 and sell my salsa out of there. And I said, well, why don't you then? Like, go for it. Like, do that. So I was like practicing that mirror technique, and I'd never done it before, but it was so liberating because he immediately backed up and went, well, I know the value of what you're offering is worth it, and like that's reasonable, but he just focused on how am I going to make that much money back. And so it's kind of interesting to see how people like back it up when you embrace that. And I did say like, well, maybe now is not the time to invest this much, like a ton of money into logo design either. After strategy, maybe you should just go get, like a Fiverr logo and see how it goes, build up your cash flow, and then come back when you're ready. That's what I told him. So it was really liberating.
Ooh, okay. So you're touching on a couple things that are super important, right? Hey, with a startup, with these small companies, the design actually matters less. The strategy is more important, right? And so that's something, like, and let's be honest, like in this day and age, in a lot of places, you don't even need a logo. What's most important is your Instagram handle and your Twitter handle, right? But that will ruffle a lot of designers' feathers. And they're like, what? No. It's very, very true, right? Now, this doesn't mean that great design isn't important, but great design should be aligned with the maturity of your company. And I think that's something that's important to have. I've had startups that have come to me, because I start brand identity at 15K. If you want me to do any kind of, creative leadership for your brand identity, it's going to start at 15K. Well, I'm just a small startup. Well, great. I'm probably not the right person for you, but I can refer you to someone else, right? So that's that point there. To touch on your point again, or to bring back the point of maturity and the importance of strategy, when you start to move into mid-sized companies, now strategy is going to be super important. Why? Because they already have finance invested in activities towards certain levels of revenue, whether it's developing the product, designing the product, manufacturing the product, where the advertising dollars are being spent, all of those things. They already invested financially into some of these activities. Them being able to identify right away what should be and shouldn't be done in a strategic way, very, very important, right? And it's even at this stage where some of them will actually invest into the research. And then you have really high-end companies that are like, I need to understand that we have problems and what those problems even look like before even diving into strategy, right? Like for me, it was really important for me to experience market research. So I've done market research and ethnographies for Sony, for the Sony Alpha camera line, right? Like I've seen what that looks like. I've seen what it looks like to do market research for YouTube, for Google. Like I know what that looks like, right? I understand what those focus groups look like. I see what these questionnaires are that they send out in emails. And it's just for them to understand what the problem is, right? So the question of strategy and how important it is to you and understanding where your potential client is in their business maturity cycle will give you a lot of great insight into how to pitch and how to charge. Because for some, it's like, it may not even be that important. Okay. Awesome. Well, guys, it's now 12:15. We went about 15 minutes after, but I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys as much value as possible. I hope this was super valuable for you guys. I hope that you guys got all the questions and insights that you needed. You guys can always find us in the Facebook group. This is just a reminder that this is brought to you by, of course, coreismagic.com, where you can find Core. Definitely connect with us on Instagram. I'm not as active on Instagram, but I am more active on Twitter and Facebook. Instagram soon come. I'm working on some things, so I'll be excited to share that with you guys. This is just a little insight into the Accelerator group. Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait to share this with you guys. It's going to be so fire. But yeah, join us. The core brand strategy fundamentals, right? Really understanding what it takes and what it needs for you guys to help scaling brands. As always, like and subscribe. And I leave you guys with much love. I want you guys to remember that you guys are creative, you guys are powerful, you guys can create anything. And we believe in you. You guys are the future. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Take care.